Today we are going to be talking about the seahorse and the owl, and we are going to be evaluating the two together and introducing them together because they do not have similar functions. However, their abilities might suggest that. This is in Animal Arena version 2.02, which means that some of this information may not be up to date, but all of the information concerning the owl and the seahorse will be up to date no matter what time you're watching this, because I like the design of these two, and I think that I'm never going to change these. But just to let you know, this might be an earlier version than the game that is currently being played. Now, let's start with the owl. This is typically a center animal. Center animals are animals that you want in the center of your board, big whoop. Typically, these ones are going to be the most easy to predict being in the center. You're not going to be playing with a whole bunch of different center animals. Like the penguin fall into the center animal category. Animals like the octopus, sometimes even the pufferfish is going to be a center animal. And so these animals are just typically the most powerful when they are in the center of your board at the start. So it makes the owl a little bit more predictable. The owl's starting control movement might seem like they can move to and therefore control 5 spaces. However, this is not going to be true, because when you start the game, you're going to have the 3 pieces that you're supposed to have. So it's going to look more like this or this. Sometimes if you're weird, you can do this, but typically your owl is going to be controlling 4 to 3 spaces and not the full 5. If you have it like this, you are technically still controlling these spaces, but you cannot move to them. Not that they're the best spaces to move to. I'm not saying that this is a huge disadvantage, but it is something to keep in mind that the owl only has 3 viable moves that your opponent could pretty easily predict if they have a good team layout. Now, the owl has its main appeal in the fact that it can move 2 spaces at once, making it the fastest in the game. You are always able to move it 2. It cannot move 1 space. You can see here it says only moves 2 squares, which might seem like I am making fun of it for not moving more squares, but when you see that it's untamed, that means that it cannot move 1 square like most creatures can. You have to move it 2 squares, meaning that it's the fastest creature in the game, but it can't be slower than that. It has to be moving 2 spaces every single time. This has some very natural synergies with the elephant, where if you were to put the owl on the X on your first turn, it is the only animal that can get to the X on the first turn. You can move your elephant anywhere. You can see when any ally lands on X, you can move this to any other space. So you can take one of your opponent's most powerful pieces. This is the main appeal of the owl, the fact that it is so fast, and that is not something that is wrong to think. The owl is incredibly fast, and that is its major appeal. However, the fact that it moves 2 spaces is also a detriment. Now, the owl can get up here really fast and then control all these spaces. Your second turn of the game, you can control 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 squares. And so with these 8 squares, you think that that'd be very helpful. And while these squares might be helpful, these squares are almost never used in a real match. So you're never going to truly see pieces getting over here. You might be moving like one of your pieces up, but that's only to protect it. So you're not really giving yourself movement. You might be able to escape from some situations, but you're not going to be causing any tricky situations for your opponent. Typically, they're just going to have one animal in your threat range if they didn't plan around the owl for some reason, and then they can swiftly move it out of the way. It's not really a big deal if the owl catches you, because you can move away or you can move toward the owl, and then they have a whole other dilemma where they have to get away from this thing without it, destroying them and without losing any of the spaces that you want to take control of. See here, the owl is still controlling the X, which is very good. Now the owl's over here. As I said earlier, very uncommon spot to be in. So it's not like other animals are gonna go out of their way to go get the owl, but you're still controlling the X, which is pretty nice. That's the appeal of the owl. However, it does also have some weaknesses built into the fact that not only it can not hit animals adjacent to it, it can't capture the bear here because it's right next to it. It also is locked into only half, a little over half in some cases, of the squares on the board. Because if you've been noticing how the owl moves, it's kind of like the bishop from chess, where it only is able to be on either even or odd spaces, depending on where it starts. See, now it's starting on an even space, so it's only on even spaces, and now it's starting on an odd space, so it's only going to be on odd spaces. Now, this is a big problem because it means that this bear is uncapturable so long as the owl remains on odd spaces. And you might say, oh, but the bear has to move on its turn. Well, what are you going to do for your turn? You're not going to go anywhere near here. You might go over here, but then the bear can just go over here. And then if you try and chase them, then the bear can go back. And it's a draw, which would be very unfortunate, especially if they had more pieces than you, in which case they would win. So that's the owl's main detriment, the fact that it can't really win games on its own. While it can control a lot of the board and it's very quick, it needs teammates in order to function. It needs good, competent teammates in order for it to provide any value to the board. And this is where the Seahorse comes in. Now, the Seahorse might, to some people, appear to be the rival to the owl or a better version of the owl to more experienced players. But truthfully, the owl and the Seahorse work really well together. Now, the Seahorse starts out, and even if it were off to the side and there were someone in the center, it can still move 4 spaces. It controls 5, so it has very good range of motion. It could go here or here. Typically not going to go here. That would be most likely getting in the way of your other pieces, which sometimes you want to do if someone were to attack you. See, like, if the penguin were to move second, you'd want to block the pufferfish because the pufferfish protects the Seahorse. But that is a niche application, whereas the fact that it can move so many spaces and control so many spaces is a more easy to understand and easy to see application. Now, another advantage of the Seahorse is the fact that it is always controlling the most amount of spaces at any given time. See, here it is over here. That is not a very good place to be. You typically don't want to be, hiding in corners or whatever. But in here, it controls 3 spaces, can move to 3 spaces. Here, just here, after one movement in a weird starting position, just here, can move to 7 spaces and it controls 8. And one of the spaces that it controls is the X, which is a very powerful space. So you want to be controlling that area more often than not. Now, the Seahorse is a very interesting case because it's not necessarily quick. It's not quick like its owl brother, but it can move more freely and control more space at any given time. So it's more for the mid game rather than the early game. Now, the Seahorse has no really given synergies. However, it can support its teammates really well with whatever they're trying to do. If you only need 2 animals for a certain idea, like say the elephant and the owl, you can support that idea with your Seahorse because you don't need a really specific third teammate, so you might as well just add the Seahorse. So you can see them being partners in crime, where you move the owl over here, and then you take one of their scary pieces, and then you can move the Seahorse to control the owl's space so that if anything touches it, you can capture back with the Seahorse. Now, you're not always going to be putting the Seahorse on teams that have little gimmicky ideas. Sometimes you just want a team of good moving animals, and the Seahorse is one of the best because there is this idea that I've discovered in the game where if you have 2 pieces in a symmetrical position, so let's say we got the bear over here, we got the elephant over here, either of these 2 situations could happen where this idea I have named parity comes in, where if you were to have started here, or it is your turn, and so you're probably going to move here or here or here. It doesn't matter. If you are in a symmetrical situation with your opponent and both animals are tame, meaning that they can move one space cardinally adjacent to them, that means that you are going to lose automatically. And you might think, whoa, that's crazy. You lose automatically. Like, that's too good to be true. There's got to be some way around this. There is no way around this. So you see the bear either starts here or gets here. It doesn't matter. If you are in this situation, the elephant will move. And then you can't go here because that will kill you. So you have to go over here. And then the elephant will follow you. And the elephant will follow you and keep you from taking this move until you get to the end of the board. Now, you can dance back and forth all you want. Say that you're back here and you're like, oh, I want to go over here. It doesn't change the fact that you've basically hit the edge of the board, because when you change direction, that's when things get spooky, because no matter where you're here or here, now you have 2 of your moves cut off. And the way to get all of someone's moves cut off is that you get them to the edge of the board from where you're at. And so he'd be forced to the edge of the board, and then you'd be forced back, and now you'd have to make a move that would kill you. So if you're ever in a situation like this where it's your turn, or if you're just like this and it's their turn, you should probably just resign from there, because you know what's going to happen, and it's better not to waste everybody's time. So that's parity in a concept. If you take parity and you apply it to the Seahorse, it doesn't work, because the Seahorse has the unique versatility of being one of the best 1v1 animals in the game. Because if you're in, let's say, a disadvantageous position, you could move it to its diagonal locations, which no matter what they do, they could run away. It doesn't matter, because you are always going to be able to threaten them where they can't threaten you. If you're in a situation like this, you could just move here. If you're in a situation like this, you could just move here. And so you're never really threatened. Like, even if they force you back here, you can literally just capture them back. And so you don't have to be afraid of parity messing you up and screwing you over. So whereas the owl is always, or not always, but typically draw if they are the last one, the Seahorse is never going to draw. They're always going to win in a 1-versus-1 situation. Sometimes they might lose, depending on certain matchups. There's some weird movement, but rare that it's ever going to happen. Like, it would have to be a penguin, and it's their turn, and then they just take you. But if it's a longer match, you're typically going to be able to squeak the win out with the Seahorse, or at least draw. But it never loses. So that is an interesting, versatile aspect to the Seahorse's endgame. And the Seahorse, not without its flaws, as we talked about, it's not as quick, and it doesn't really facilitate any other animal game plans. It's simply just a good thing that you can tack on. So if you're thinking about having a team and you need someone who's quick and can get you to the X, that is going to be your guy. But if you just want an extra member to your team and you want the versatility, this is going to be your guy. And now, while the owl has that little extra reach, the Seahorse makes up for it in spades by being able to just move wherever it needs to.
Right, yeah, of course.